Good afternoon, brothers of the 8th District. This is your Director of Public Relations, Brother Jared Smith. And today I'm happy to be sitting down for a few minutes and talking to one of our good brothers from the 8th District, Brother Deric Gilliard. I'm just going to jump right into it because I don't want to waste any time and I want to give you space to really fill our lamps with what you've been doing over the last 3 or 4 decades, as well as just get to know a little bit more about you, especially since we'll be seeing you in Topeka, Kansas, probably within the next 72 hours. Brother Gilliard, if you just wouldn't mind, let's start off. Why don't you introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself to the brothers of the 8th District and just give us a little background about how you came to be a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated.
Absolutely, Brother Smith. Yes. So I basically say I grew up in Kansas. Okay, my parents were military, so I moved around a lot, but most of my formative years were right there in the Junction City, Fort Riley area. And so moved off to spend time in Fort Hood, spent time in Atlanta, spent time in Germany, but most of it was in right there in central Kansas. And so when it was time to go off to college, when I figured I wasn't going to be a pro baseball player, I also liked to write, and I was a journalist, and so I went on up the road to University of Kansas. And probably, I'll be honest, uh, had no inclination to pledge. Hadn't that wasn't part of my family history, and but something happened my junior year, and I saw the brothers, and there was something different about because we hadn't had a line for a while, at the University of Kansas, and I said, you know, let's do this thing, and so 1975, we went over and we went over under Delta Phi out of Topeka because although there had been a line the year before, there still was no, charter. We were working on that, and then the following year we brought in the charter line, uh, their brothership connection. So that's kind of how I got connected to Omega, and I'll say that so much of what I have garnered, particularly from the principles of Omega, made me come out of my shadow, come out of my being a shy, just quiet little black brother. Because back then, this is, it's 50 years ago, right? I pledged 50 years ago. So,
Uh,
this was the era when, all the sisters liked all the light-skinned brothers, and, so it was a different era. And, yeah, pledging was something that, of course, it's always challenging, right? But you find out who you are, and you find out who you got next to you.
right,
And
right.
our line has continued to stay real close. We get together once a year. We go back to the yard, usually for the last regular season basketball game of the year. We just, there was a time that it wasn't always like that, but it's the brotherhood and the fellowship is strong, and so it's a real important part of my life, and I think particularly the perseverance aspect of it, and because of the kind of work I do in terms of being an author and things, the scholarship is huge, and really it is all about uplift because I think that when people know better, they usually will try and do better. And so we have to, continue to uplift our people, our families, our communities, and challenge our country when it's wrong. So I'm into all of those things, and that's all undergirded by manhood, most certainly.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Yeah, that's good stuff. I'm definitely when you were pledging in the 70s, and it was definitely different than it was now. But talk a little bit about how that experience of pledging and being a part of Omega Psi Phi fraternity kind of prepared you for working under five presidents.
Yeah, for sure. I think that I had a my I was a special of Big Brother Cocaine out of Wichita, Kansas, and he was something, I'm gonna tell you. And he'd get in your face, and so he challenged all of us, but he really challenged me. And my DP, I had to pick him up and taking the class every morning. And, because I was the only brother on the line with the car. So, there was a little bit of extra there. And but it challenged me. And I had really good mentors and role models, particularly my father, two tours in Nam and one in Korea. He finally, you know, uh, retired when he was shot down out of a copter in Nam. And so that was my hero. And so I understood what it was like to be a Black man in this country. I understood what it took to survive and to excel. And so I think a lot of that did prepare me for I never would have figured I'd taken this route and ended up, doing public speaking and just challenging people because it really wasn't my nature at all. But Omega was instrumental in that because I was pushed and then I learned how to push people also at the right time in the right way in a manner that would be helpful and not hurtful. And so yeah, I think that that was one of the keys certainly to allow me, particularly I think one of the things I got from my father, he reached the highest level you could reach as an enlisted man in the Army. He retired as a command sergeant major. And I know that, for example, there were times when he was resented even by the other Black soldiers
Oh
because,
wow.
as a country boy, 12 siblings, and, where they worked hard every day. They were out in the agrarian community, out picking whatever the harvest was. And
Right.
for him to get in the military, shoot, hey, 3 square meals a day, get up early, work hard. He loved it. And so I tell people, him and all of his brothers, all six of his brothers all served. I tell them, you served enough for me and my son. So, but he modeled it. And one of the things I got from him is that he figured out how you could be adaptable in the sense. So I worked for Republicans and I worked for Democrats, and my responsibility was to forward their mandate, whatever it was, whether I agreed with it or didn't. And
Right.
I disagreed with all of them at some point in time. And some of them I disagreed with vehemently, including President Trump and most adamantly President Trump. But so I consider myself kind of part of, I write from three perspectives as a Black man, in America, who was born at the time when my parents didn't have the right to vote, you know what I'm saying? And I experienced a lot of that myself. So a Black man, a man of faith, I'm a Christian and an activist, a justice warrior, because I think that it's important and we have to push for not a lot of the issues we have today, I think, is the fact that there's an element of white America that is afraid that roughly 2042 we're to become a minority majority nation, and that scares the hell out of a lot of them because they
Right.
think that we're going to treat them like they've treated us, but we're not that kind of people. And so I had to be flexible and I had to be able to even do things. I wouldn't do anything that violated my morals, but I was kind of I was son who wrote a book called Subversive Witness, and I felt like I was a subversive witness. I helped all I could on the inside, even during the Trump administration, And people on the outside who understood what I was facing appreciated it. And they told me that, just enough to keep me there, to keep me in the game till we could get through that.
Awesome. 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 So kind of piggybacking off of that, I mean, to work under one presidential administration is a huge accomplishment in and of itself. But to have worked under five administrations is something that's worthy of digging a little deeper into. So what exactly was your role in those administrations? And what do you think it was that allowed you to, especially because, like you said, you worked under Democratic administrations and Republican administration. So, what was it about you or about what you were doing that allowed you to be so consistent throughout those five administrations?
I think my background helped in the sense of, again, being a Black man in America. I've been under a lot of just duress, and I understood, adversity, certainly. I think that one of the things was, yes, I knew I had to be flexible enough, and I also knew I had to be really good. I was hired by a white liberal nurse who was a regional director for the 8 southeastern states that we served, the Carolinas, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, I think Mississippi. And so she hired me basically because she said her office needed to more accurately reflect the people we served in the region. And you think about it, it's the poorest region overall, the
Mhm.
blackest, the one with the most health disparities, the most poverty, and the least educated. And so for me, it was a privilege because I felt like I was serving our community. I was serving the country, but I was absolutely serving our community and the least of these. And so it was a privilege. And I came to that position after working for Dr. King's organization, which is the most meaningful 4 years of my life. I was communications national communications director at the SCLC, and I was the public affairs advisor then for to these five presidents. And so one of my real roles was to make sure in every instance that there was diversity and equity and inclusion at all
Right.
these boards and all these meetings and all these. And there were several times, and they were very supportive of that, particularly in that first administration. So I said, oh, this is cool because it's a lot of the same kind of things I felt like I did at the SCLC. Now, of course, it wasn't nearly so intentional in the Bush administration.
Right.
And then you go to the Obama administration, and you can imagine how cool that was. We had the only all black staff in the country of the 10 regions. And
Wow.
by the way, under Trump, that 10 region has now been shrunk to 4 regions.
Wow.
And so along with all the other stuff going on around Doge, that's part of it. And so it's just a
Wow.
lot of collateral damage. So in that regard, I got out, just in time. But so that was, and so to be able to implement the Affordable Care Act, and 7 presidents before Obama had tried to do that. And so because of our work, and we didn't enroll anybody, but what we did was set up these coalitions because 7 of our 8 governors were Republican and they were absolutely against expanding Medicaid. And the way the Affordable Care Act was designed, it was that every state would expand Medicaid. So that meant we had to go into states and set up coalitions. Like in Mississippi, we went and worked with the Mississippi Health Advocacy Program, which is aimed at, the least of these. And we went and worked with the Children's Defense Fund and NAACP and all of these organizations. And we built these coalitions, and I would have these calls every week or every other week, and I'd have our experts on so that whatever they were running into challenges, these people would then go back to their agencies and we'd work on fixes. So in the end, our little one of 10 regions was responsible for just under 24% of people in the entire country then
Wow.
enrolled in the ACA. So that was,
Wow.
you know, certainly one of the highlights of my life, not just
Yeah.
working with this first Black president, but to be able to do this for our people. And I'd see people come out after registering and getting some health insurance for the first time, and you just see the pride on their faces sometimes. And sometimes they're in their boots and their overalls and they're sweaty. And, you know, it just, it was a real something that I will always cherish. And so that kind of thing was super cool. And then to go from there to that Trump administration and to see him try to tear down everything to destroy Obama's legacy. And all that took place as a result of, I don't know if you remember the correspondence dinner where, they
Mm.
usually poke fun at the president, but the
Right.
president was watching Trump there, and Obama talked about how he was the father of the birtherism, talked about he wasn't an American. And you could see Trump was sitting there stewing. And I think he had a hard on to destroy Obama's legacy ever since.
Hmm.
And that's what's happening now. I mean, he's going to go back against the Affordable Care Act. What they're going after Medicaid, they're going after Social Security. I mean, they've already said Head Start's out the door, Meals on Wheels. So all of these things are in play now, and along with the assault to destroy anything around the Black legacy in this country.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Um, Man, that's really, really cool. So looking back over your
40
career,
years.
40 years, five administrations,
Yeah.
uh, how do you define success in your role over those years?
So one of the things that I had to do was I did a lot of media placement. So in other words, where I'm getting somebody on NPR or CNN or MSNBC or in the New York Times or the Atlanta Journal-Constitution or the Charlotte Observer. So that was a lot of my role. We Another thing I was responsible for was a lot of outreach. So the organizations we needed to be connected to, I would meet with them and usually be at their regular meetings, which it was a monthly or quarterly. So I was establishing these relationships so that then if they needed something or knew something or there was a way we could partner, let's say that the secretary of HHS was coming in and this would be a great group to host some meeting. And so those are the kind of things that I did. Did a lot of public information. If somebody from the public called, they had a complaint. Let's say somebody had a complaint because um, they suspected that one of their children was, or they knew somebody that was being abused, or
Hmm.
somebody's should be getting Medicare and wasn't getting Medicare, or, again, even elder abuse, all of those kind of things, because we called HHS the cradle to the grave agency because it was from birth to death. It kind of
Wow.
incorporates the largest, outside the military, the largest federal agency. So it was real broad, like 13 agencies. And I wasn't an expert in any of those, but I then would bring in the experts. So we were kind of like a funnel. We were a clearinghouse, and then we would pass it out. And then I did a lot of work with congressionals, like Brother Hank Johnson in Georgia is one of us, and so I worked real closely with his office. All
Mhm.
of the congressionals, the mayors, the county commissioners, all those kind of people, we did a lot of work with. And then even certainly under Obamacare, we did a great deal of work with the Divine Nine, because to get the ACA out there, to help educate people, to engage people, to just to raise awareness, and that was something real cool. I spoke here at the district meeting during the Obama administration about that. So those are a couple of the things that we did. And when you think about some of the huge issues, you think COVID, you think,
Mhm.
of course, the Affordable Care Act, and I'll say that one of the huge issues for me, in addition to Trump doing everything he could to undermine the Affordable Care Act, was his mischaracterization over the justice marches. You know, he wanted to make it about the flag and patriotism, and we knew it was about over policing, particularly of unarmed Black men.
Right.
So I had a responsibility of retweeting all of his stuff. And that was some of the most painful thing I had to do because, you know, the tweeter in chief, in fact, they could have taken away his his phone, he probably, wouldn't have had to wait a term. He would have won that next term because he destroyed himself because, but yeah, it was, so some of that was painful, but those were the kind of things that I would do.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. And that kind of leads right into speaking of the tweeter in chief. Let's talk a little bit about your latest book, The Longest 4 Years of My Life. Talk about the genesis of that book and what readers should expect to come away with after reading The Longest 4 Years of My Life.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, I write from these three perspectives. I'm a Black man, will always be a Black man, you know what I'm saying? And so certain things we know that come with that, right? And secondly, a man of faith. And because I think that we wouldn't have gotten through where we are had it not been, for that aspect of our lives, certainly mine, because it's been a whole lot of my time on my knees in the Trump administration in particular. And thirdly, justice, I think is huge. And I weave all those themes in this book. And I very early on, it was apparent to me that this administration was going to be starkly different than any other. Now, all of them, there's transitions, right? There's a certain, you have to build the trust because you have a new leader coming in. And usually, you in every instance, I went from Democrat to Republican to Democrat. It's always a change. And so they are kind of taught that, you know, watch out, let's see, make sure these people are going to be loyal to you. But, when I took my oath, it wasn't to a person, it wasn't to a president, it was to the country and to the nation and to the republic. And so, but I'm not going to openly defy what they say I can do. And so I started chronicling real quickly. I said, okay, and I believe it was the Lord that gave me that. And so I just started documenting all this stuff, all this crazy stuff that had never happened before and didn't happen in the Biden administration. I'd even had Republicans. I mean, I'd send my releases out and I'd have people I'd worked for years pick up the phone and say, man, this isn't true. And I'm not gonna print this garbage. And it didn't happen much, but it never happened in any other administration. And I said,
Right.
okay, because it was real propaganda driven. And because my job was you send it to me, and my job is to send it out. Now I'm not endorsing it, but I'm sending it out. And so that was some of what was so different. And I even had one Republican editor. I never met her, a small place in upstate Georgia, rural, almost all white Georgia, part of Georgia. And she called me up and she said, look, don't ever send me any more of this stuff. You know it isn't true. And I know it isn't true. She said, I'm a Republican now. And she said, if you send me something else like this, I'm gonna put it in spam and block you. And of course, I didn't tell her I was thankful that she had that attitude and appreciate it, but I really was. And so it was, but just to see that somebody that was a Republican still knew that this was all BS
Right.
and it was propaganda. And so those were things that were important. In fact, and one of the things they told me, we were waiting, one of the big things about the Affordable Care for the previous 4 years, in particular, I used Mississippi, for example. They would invite me and I would do like a 6 or 8 city top to bottom of the state tour. They would arrange it. I'd go with them. We go to city and explain who was eligible for the Affordable Care Act. How do you contact, the people to get information or to get signed up? What had changed between now, this year and last year? And so but Trump, again, they said it was the worst thing since sliced bread. They talked about it left and right. Then they finally told us we weren't going to be out supporting these states. And Mississippi's our poorest state. It's the state
Right.
with the deepest vestiges of Jim Crow and racism of our 8 states. And so I was supposed to be coming. And then they finally told us in this national meeting, that we weren't going to. So I went in and told my boss, I said, well, you know, these people are looking for me to come and we got to tell them, right? She said, yep. Went home, wrote the email, showed it to her the next day. She said, yep, send it on. And they called me up and they say, well, what do you mean, Derek, you're not coming? And I had to be, real careful about my response. But
Right.
then 2 days later, I think maybe 3 or 4 days later, I get this newsletter and it says HHS abandons Mississippians. Okay. So, I'm saying to myself, oh, excellent, right? So I
Right.
go take it into her. We send it up to our handlers because, we didn't want it to hear anywhere else. And so the lady, our HR person up in headquarters, because I'm based in Atlanta,
Hmm.
they're reading me and my boss, who's a white Republican, staunchly pro-Trump. I mean, she was a pit dog. But in the end, she says, hey, we had, you know, 4 years to replace and repeal. We didn't do it. So now we should be out serving the people. She agreed
Right.
with me on that point. So the lady asked me, the HR director, who's a black woman, and she probably didn't want to ask me this, but she did. She said, what made you write that email to them, Derek? So I'm sitting here stewing, but I'm trying to keep a poker face. And then I finally said to her, well, would you just have preferred that we just didn't show up? I just didn't come
Mm.
because they were looking for us. Okay. And so then they told me to go home and write an explanation why I thought it was important that we go there. And of course I did. And I knew nothing was going to happen with it. But they said that tomorrow we're going to have our people in DC, our public affairs, they call it ASPA. They're going to send you an apology. You're going to send to them apologizing for, you know, telling them for why you didn't come. And so uh, I still don't have that apology. And the reason being, they didn't want to put anything in writing. Then I
Right.
started getting these calls from all over, from England, from the Washington Times, from the New York Times, from Chicago, saying, well, we're hearing you aren't going to be out supporting the regions. And of course, I referred every one of them to DC because I said, I'm not answering nothing. You created this mess. You're going to deal with it. And then, of course, we were the black sheep after that because they watched us even more closely. And
Right.
several times I almost got fired. So I knew I was dancing a fine line. But, that was my way of supporting the people and supporting the people out in the communities. Because, like the federally qualified health centers, a lot of people don't know this. So you can go and get primary health care on a sliding fee scale. So you don't have any money, you don't pay any money. If you make a small amount of money, you pay a small amount. And so uh, those people, the navigators that were hired to help guide people through and help them enroll and pick the best choices, all those people were kind of out on their own then because we weren't out there helping them. We weren't supporting them. I had a colleague of mine who said, in fact, she worked for CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, who fund the navigators, and they would send her stuff to send to our colleagues out in the field. She wouldn't even send it. She said, I got 2 kids at home who like to eat. Now, I went on and sent them. I didn't hold the meetings anymore, but I sent them. I said, no, if they're going to fire me for this, they're just going to have to fire me for it
Right.
because it was still the law of the land. So to me, for example, that was where I was putting, I would say, that was where I needed to exemplify manhood and say, well, I'm just going to do this and whatever the consequences are, because I'm here to do this role. And so, that was some of the kind of stuff. In fact, we pulled this miracle off for this colleague of mine in DC, because like shortly before, I think it was just before Thanksgiving, they asked us to do this impossible task, all 10 regions. Now, we're the only ones that did it, okay, by the way. And we had to talk to all the hospital CEOs, not all of them. We had to interview 10 of them in the regions, and, big city hospitals, small city hospitals. And most of them are away at the Riviera by then. They're on their vacation, starting, and so we were able to pull it off. And this white woman in DC was overheard in the lunchroom saying, I don't like that, Deric, because I hear he's still down there trying to carry out pushing the Obama agenda.
Oh,
And so
wow.
that was my reputation, but I was proud to wear it and just happy to survive it and praying, because if he'd have won again, I wasn't going to do it 4 more years, but I said I would have done my part by then.